Oh, and when I read that, your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Money and You show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host. I'm so happy that you are here today and have a great show for you. I'm so excited. This year has been so phenomenal with the guests. And so today I am honored and very fortunate to have a really amazing guest. We're going to talk about so many interesting things. So, we talk about money a lot, and we're going to get to that, a little bit about redefining rich, what that might mean in a new definition. We're going to talk about leadership, unconscious bias, career change, all kinds of interesting things. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring in Tony Chatman and tell you a little about him before we start. So Tony has worked with hundreds of corporations and government agencies, including the U.S. Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, Chase Bank, Estee Lauder, NASA, and Jefferson Health, to help people reach new heights of effectiveness by understanding themselves and others better. As a leadership keynote speaker, his passion is contagious, and his messages provide practical, usable knowledge that people implement immediately for business and personal success. As a subject matter expert and recognized thought leader in the area of workplace relationships, Tony has devoted his adult life to understanding what makes people tick and how to bring out the best in people, including ourselves, and how to pass this information on in simple yet practical terms. Whether addressing our hidden biases, helping navigate disruption and change, or providing leaders with skills that make them indispensable, Tony provides practical solutions that align with people's real-world experiences. Tony Chatman delivers presentations that are an entertaining and impassioned balance of both science and practical insight. His ability to help leaders, team members, and people from every background and diversity adopt empowering mindsets and strategies that allow them to adapt, reinvent, and transform the results they produce both personally and professionally. Recognized for his stage presence and intensity, Tony delivers the kind of results that consistently garner outstanding and enthusiastic reviews. His profound ability to connect with every audience member ensures they come away feeling that he spoke directly to them and were impacted by his message. Audiences leave focused and motivated to turn individual differences into business advantages. As an author, Tony completed his first book, Why I Hate My Job, What Leaders Must Understand About the Human Dimension of Leadership. This book focuses on the cost of poor performance and real-world approaches to develop high-caliber leaders. And he recently completed you know what? I'm going to have to talk to Tony about this. He also has a book called The Force Multiplier, How to Lead Teams Where Everyone Wins. And in 2018, he delivered his first TED Talk, How to Stop Settling for Less. So you can find that. And I'm just going to welcome in Tony Chatman. Hello.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hi, Tony. I'm so pleased to have you here. What an honor. There's so much that you've done.
It's great to be here. So, okay, can I say one thing right at the beginning?
Yes, sir.
It's really important.
Yes.
So I swear to everyone who's watching that picture that Michelle was showing really is me. I don't want anyone to be confused and think, who in the world is that dude? So that was me pre-COVID. Who you see right now is post-pandemic. I just want to clear that up for everybody.
I love that so much. And I was excited when I saw the headshot too. I was like, oh my gosh, the Tony I just met is so relaxed and just living life right now, actually in a super enjoyable way. So I bet people are looking at thinking, wow, how can I transform from the guy in the business suit to the guy with the palm trees? So yeah, Tony, there is so much to talk about. We had such a fun conversation, and I wrote down so many notes. So I'm thinking maybe we start with a little about your background, because we have people listening who either are interested in career change, and you have such a remarkable backstory. So, and a lot of change there. So if you wouldn't mind kind of looking back a little and telling us how you got to this place that you are at right now.
Sure. So I was trained in college as a chemical engineer. So that is my, college training, my background. I left college and started working for a major chemical company. I had an incredible time. And I'll get into the whys of this first transition in a little bit, but there's a period of time in which I had a paradigm shift, and I left my corporate job to work in a faith-based nonprofit. I worked with ministers, I worked in ministry, I trained ministers, I worked with community, all those things. I did that for about a decade. And then I came to the realization that the problem with nonprofit is it's nonprofit, right? I mean, it's like, it's sometimes it's hard to sustain that.
Yeah.
And so for the sake of my family and some health issues that were going on, we decided to make a shift. I went into the entrepreneurial world. My best friend, we had a financial services company, but post 9/11 and post war and the volatility of the market and some of the clients that we had, we felt that it really wasn't the best thing. And then I really landed in this position of where I am right now, which there was a moment of convergence in which I saw how all of my experience and all of my talents and gifts had aligned to open up this world of speaking and really helping people, whether it's to find their purpose or to make their time at work really more fulfilling. That people should be at work and should be able to contribute in a powerful way. And so that was really my little lineage of career transgressions.
Yeah, I love that.
Transgressions was definitely not the word. Oops.
No, that's fantastic. And once you started speaking, I mean, it sounds like that really took off. You've spoken on a lot of big stages and done, a tremendous amount of important keynote talks. Was there some any reluctance to get on stage and do this? Did it feel natural? Did you have to push yourself at all? Any comfort zone issues there?
Let me blow you away, because I don't know if we had this part of the conversation.
We didn't.
So I had, because I worked in faith-based nonprofit, I had a lot of work that I had done as far as speaking in front of people. I had probably given 800 to 1,000 presentations during that time span. Before that, even as a chemical engineer, I was often the liaison between clients and the research department. And so my ability to take things and break them down into a very simple way and in a way that's digestible for marketing and sales departments was, a really important thing. So, but here's the wild story, and I couldn't have made this up if I wanted to. I was going through this moment of I just don't know what to do. Things aren't quite where I want them to be. I'd started working kind of as a mechanical engineer, part-time contract person, just to figure things out. And I realized very quickly that wasn't it. And so I always had this idea of having a board of directors, a personal board of directors. And so I grabbed my closest friends, my board of directors. These are people who had known me they knew me in and out. They knew my business sense. They knew my personal life. They knew my marriage. They knew everything. And so we met at one of my friends' houses, and this was a help Tony figure out what to do moment. And at the beginning, a close friend of mine, he just asked that stereotypical question of, Tony, if you could do anything, what would you do? And in my mind, I was thinking about business development, and that's what I planned to talk about. But I almost instinctively said, well, gosh, if I could do anything, I get paid to speak. And before I get finished the wheels were now in motion. And what happened in that moment is my friend, and I'm going to give his name, Elroy Smith, he was running 3 radio stations in Chicago. He goes, well, I have Les Brown. He's doing a radio show for me, and we're doing an event in Bermuda. Man, if I had known this before, I would have had you come to Bermuda and speak at the event. Well, my buddy Roger looked at Elroy and just challenged him on the spot. He goes, really, Elroy? That's your excuse if you had known earlier? So now you're not going to do it? And Elroy just stopped and said, tell you what, if you can get there, I'll put you on stage.
Wow.
It's going to be Les Brown, 3 of his proteges, and I'll put you there. And right in that moment, Roger grabbed his computer, opened it up, and bought me an airline ticket, so I had no excuses. And so I went to Bermuda. I blew people's minds, including Les's, to be honest.
Wow.
And right after Butterfield Bank said, we want to do a follow-up event. We only want Les Brown and we want Tony Chatman. We're going to have them for a full weekend. And that's where things went. And at that event, a person who was working for the Ministry of Education saw me and said, you're the reason I came here. Now I realize why I was sent. And they hired me to speak. And so at that point, the wheels were really in motion.
Wow. Yeah, that story is a great one.
Yeah,
I love that.
it's like it's like starting a garage band and your first gig is opening for the Rolling Stones. I mean, it's the most
Yeah.
unbelievable thing, right?
Yeah. Wow. I love everything that you said though about being asked the right question, which forced you to come up with an answer that you then put out into the universe and just, that I mean, it all starts with that kind of awareness of what the answer really is and putting it out there. So yeah, that's really amazing. So let's talk about some of the things that you talk about. What is it that you mostly are focused on right now in terms of speaking?
Well, especially in today's climate, I do a lot of work on unconscious bias. Now, I started working with unconscious bias around 2015. So before it became a hot topic,
Mm-hmm.
I had been doing reading and a number of books had mentioned it. And it just started really piqued my interest. And, a little backstory, a number of clients had asked me to work in the diversity area, DE&I, and I was just like, that's just not my thing. I don't want to do it. I don't want to be pigeonholed. That's just not a fit. But on the side, from a scientific standpoint, I was fascinated with this idea of unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
And I dug into it like I would do as an engineer, right? I wanted to really understand it. And so finally, a client was just like, wouldn't take no for an answer. We'll do whatever you want to. And I said, okay, I'll talk about diversity, but I must do it from the standpoint of this idea of unconscious bias, because I think that that's often the real issue, and B, that's going to open up so many other conversations. And it just spread like wildfire. I had done 35 presentations on it before I ever put it on my website, because
Wow.
people started hearing about it and hearing about the way that I presented it, and they were just fascinated, and it opened so many people's eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Could you kind of, we haven't done a show on unconscious bias. And so this is great. And I would love for you to just sort of give a little summary explanation of what that term even means. And then, because we hear it all the time, but there's so many terms. This happens all the time on shows. There's a term that's so common out there, but I feel like half the world doesn't actually know what it even means. So it'd be great to explain it a little. And then maybe a couple of some of the keys that you find are important for people who, really want to look at this.
Sure. So, and I totally agree with you, Michelle. I think especially when you have a topic that is really hot,
Yeah.
people hear the term but don't understand what it means.
Yeah.
So the best way to describe this, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, then I'll tell you a story. So Daniel Kahneman wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and he's really, in many ways, his work is what a lot of people base their belief on unconscious bias about. He said the brain should be looked at as two different thinking systems, right? You have system 2, which is what we normally think of when we think of thinking, right? A logical, normal, conscious self. And this is where we tend to make logical decisions from, right? We're aware of that, but it has limitations, right? We know number 1, it actually has to be engaged. When we get distracted, it gets disrupted. Number 2, it can handle about 40 things going on at one time. That sounds like a lot until you go to Times Square in New York and you see thousands, if not millions, of pieces of stimuli that your brain is trying to take in. It just gets overwhelmed. Well, there's another thinking system called System 1, and this is our subconscious. We're often aware of our subconscious. We're not aware of the fact that the average person on a daily basis makes at least 90% of their decisions from their subconscious and not their conscious brain.
Yeah.
That's mind-boggling. It floored me when I heard that. But it doesn't give you full thoughts the way that the conscious brain does. What it does is it gives you emotions and images, but they affect how we make decisions. And so here's the backstory. 2012, my wife got her dream job But it meant we had to move. We're going to move from the Midwest, a suburb of Chicago, to New York. Now, we didn't move directly to New York City. It was this beautiful area about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of Manhattan in the Catskill Mountains. So people have started telling me about all the wildlife, right? There's going to be, don't just think about squirrels and birds. There's going to be groundhogs, and there's going to be deer, and there's going to be black bear, right? You're in the Catskills. And we saw all of those things. But what no one told us about was rattlesnakes. They're really rattlesnakes. They're very prevalent in that area.
Wow.
And you start hearing about it all the time. It gets into your mind. So one day I'm at the edge of my property, and I have about an acre of land at the time, and I'm raking leaves, and I hear my neighbor say something, and right as I looked up, I felt something slither across my front foot, right? Now, had I been only using my logical brain, I would have looked down and said, I wonder what kind of snake it is. It's about this thick around. I should see if it has a rattle or fangs that look aggressive. And what happened? What happened was, before I knew what happened, I was about 60 yards away on my deck going, what the? And you can imagine what came after what the, right? But here's the key. Before I knew what happened, I felt something and responded. Before I could even process what happened, I felt something and responded. And so when we talk about unconscious bias, we're talking about things of that nature. And so if you break it down, the unconscious part means it comes from system one, right? Our subconscious. But the bias part, that's the word that people don't understand, because they often think of prejudice. They think of racism, misogyny, homophobia. But if you really look at bias, what bias is closer to being like an algorithm. I'm engineer, so I think of algorithms. But an example of an algorithm is a recipe, right? Like if you're going to make pound cake, you take a pound of butter, pound of sugar, pound of flour, pound of eggs, you put them together and you make pound cake. That's why it has that name. Now you can make other cakes by changing the ingredients or adding, subtracting, but it won't be pound cake. That's the recipe or the algorithm for pound cake. Well, turns out that we actually have recipes or algorithms for a lot of things. What does smart look like? What does dangerous look like? What does safe look like? What's trustworthy look like? All of these things are in our subconscious, and we don't realize we often, just as I did with the snake, we respond to people based off that initial glance, the emotions that happen in there, and it's all kind of filtered through this algorithm of bias, and we respond before we even realize we're responding. And then we just kind of keep the pattern going. So when we talk about unconscious bias, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, this is why sometimes police will see one person and they look like a suspect and see another person and they don't. This is why sometimes we hire people that we think are going to really work out because they charmed us, but there was something about how they looked, how they dressed, that appealed to us versus us really digging in and finding out who they are and making a logical decision. So that's kind of a high level view of unconscious bias. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, that was really, really well said, and interesting. Gave me a lot to think about. And so when you apply this to, for example, the business world or other organizations, how is this designed to help them? I'm assuming to make better decisions.
Yeah, it's to make better decisions as well as to create a culture of diversity and inclusion, but it's both of those things. So one of the things is just being aware that we have biases, because when you're aware that you have a bias or that you're capable of biases, in the moment you can stop, you can pause, and you can take a moment and kind of breathe and think. And what that does is that engages the logical part, system 2 of your brain. And so it gives you a chance to say, okay, instead of going, wow, this person is exactly who I want to hire, or this is exactly what I want to buy from, you go, wait a second. You know what it is? She reminds me of a doctor, or he reminds me of a teacher I had, and then we start to just assess it properly so that we can respond. So that's one of the simplest things is to be aware of it. One of the other things, though, that's really important is we have to expand our areas of exposure. Quite often we're around people who are like us, whether it's gender, race, ethnicity, language, things of that nature. We're around people that make us comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the more we're exposed to different types of people, there are all sorts of studies and metrics that show increasing our exposure, it starts to eliminate and actually reprogram our biases. See, a lot of the things we do, we're trying to mitigate the effect of bias,
Mm-hmm.
but exposure in and of itself, being around different people, being around people of a different orientation, that changes your bias, because now you go from, well, I heard this from my parents, or I saw it on the news, or I saw this on social media, to, well, wait a second, that's not like Bob. I know Bob, and I know Joe, and I know, Shirley, and that's not like any of them. We now have benchmarks that we have that they'll immediately counteract our bias. And I'm going to tell you this one quick thing,
Yeah.
because this is how powerful the bias thing is. So David Eagleman, he's a neuroscientist. He talks about the study in which they take functional MRIs, which are just amazing. So they let a patient, they see a person get stabbed in the hand with the needle, right? And their immediate reaction is, empathy, sympathy, pain, right? But then they took the same hand and they put different labels on it. Some were racial, some were religious, some were political. And all of a sudden, you saw that natural response of sympathy and empathy changed based on who they thought the hand was. If they thought it was someone of a different political ideology, then they didn't feel as much hurt with them. If they saw it was a person of a different race, they didn't see as much hurt in it. Now, this is not something they're thinking about. This is something they're feeling.
Mm.
And so the more we get exposed to different people, it allows us to start feeling and treating everyone as truly human versus only people that we're used to associating with. So I know that was a lot, but I just had to share that one study because it blew my mind when I heard that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Really, really interesting. Yeah, I love this topic. It, I was driving here and I was thinking, is there anything where we have a thought and we shouldn't, if we could, if there was time and we had the ability to do this, literally stop and think about that thought and where it comes from and whether it's the right thought to be having. I feel like we are so impulsive and so reactive, and as a coach, we're always kind of looking at thoughts because thoughts make all the difference, and changing those thoughts will change everything. And so this is another example. This show oftentimes is more about your relationship with money, and it's kind of the same thing. We have so many biases around money, what we've been taught, what's programmed into our brains about what's okay and what's not okay, and all the stuff around money. And so it just transcends every area of life, I feel like. And of course, you could certainly argue that it's most important when it comes to people, but which I would say it is. But it's just interesting to me. It's interesting what you're talking about are the feelings that we have that maybe go unexamined, or the feelings that lead to thoughts that go unexamined, and then we act in whatever way we do. So yeah, it fascinates me. And it's quite the journey, I think, to get to that point where you can stop a reaction and think about it first. So I don't know. What advice do you give to leaders and people out there about how to manage this?
I mean, I think what's interesting, Michelle, is as a coach, you deal with this all the time, right? You're changing the way people think and then getting their behaviors to match up with those new thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But you're never working with a blank slate, are you?
No.
Right?
No.
It's always, they have this idea of what should be done or what should work or whatever. You're like, yeah, that don't work. Let me help you out. Okay. So that's really what we're doing. And so having an outside set of eyes helps a lot. Having some best practices that are online that hold us accountable helps us a lot. Doing things in the workplace in terms of, if we're talking about from a people standpoint, really making sure that we think about who our leadership, what they look like, what they reflect, for a lot of reasons. But there's so many studies, so much data that shows that the more diverse and inclusive an organization is, the more profitable it is, the more resilient it is, the more productive it is, right? We know these things, but having, even thinking in terms of coaching and mentoring, making sure that we consider these differences when it comes into it. And then in terms of decision making, exactly what you said, we have to go back and say, okay, why did I make that decision? That's what we don't do. We don't say, and I'll tell you, I've become like, really, it's a big thing for me. I make a decision. I think, okay, did I do that because it's what I always did? Did I do that because it's what my parents taught me? I learned that in school, or why did I make that decision? I'm not going to necessarily change it, but why? I want to understand how I'm thinking, because that changes the world for me. And just like, what you do, having a person from the outside, someone objective who's not in the middle of it, who can hold you accountable, who can redirect you, who give you a different frame of thought, that means the world for everyone. And we really all need someone like that in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I was listening to a woman talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whether she's an expert in this, and whether she pushes this on companies. And basically, she said, no. If a company comes and says, I'm just not really that interested, I'm not that big, it doesn't, it's not going to have an impact for me. Her response is fine. I'm not going to make you do anything, but the competition ultimately is going to basically run you over. I mean, because the way, things are going and demographically and everything else. And I'm sitting here with two younger interns helping me here, and, they're not gonna, they don't want that. They don't want a world that is not reflecting, the reality of the world. So,
and that's a great point. It's not something you can force. You have to want to do it. I mean, I don't even work with clients who tell me they want to do it, but they're really just checking a box, because I know they're not going to do it, right? This has to be something that, as an organization, you believe in, whether it's because of profit or whether because it's of social reasons, that you're really wanting to do this. Just like, you can't force friendships, right? At some point, we're dealing with human beings. If you force this, it's never going to be sincere, and at some point, it's going to just fall apart. I think forcing it on organizations is challenging, but when an organization comes to that reality, and often, and I'll be honest with you, very rarely do people call me and spend the kind of money that I charge because everything is going great. Right? Like, you probably don't get a lot of coaching clients going, you know what? I'm awesome. I just need a tune up. Just tweak me a little bit and I'm good. That's not how things work, right? Things are falling apart. Oh my gosh, we've got EEO complaints and lawsuits, and one client, we have a PR nightmare, and it's with viral and all this stuff. Is like, okay, sounds like you're motivated. Let's do the work. So I'm kind of Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction. I guess that's who I've become.
Yeah. No, this is great. You also mentioned something about generational diversity, and I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit too, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, my thing about generational diversity is, I think we overthink this thing a little bit, right? It almost comes back to how I feel about unconscious bias, diversity, personalities, whatever. Like, there's this quote I love from George Orwell. He says, every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, and wiser than the one that comes after it. You think about that, that's like everyone. So what is the issue we have? The issue we have is that those who are older think, gosh, you know what? This younger generation, they're just not very wise. And the younger generation is like, and we're smarter than them. And the truth is, we all go through it. We just hadn't really used the phrase generational diversity. But when I was graduating college, I remember being in job interviews, and these presidents are recruiting us, and they're saying the exact same thing that you hear right now about the younger side of millennials and Gen Z, who's also called, I like to call them globals. And it's just, here's the reality. The reason we're different generations is because we have different shared experiences.
Right.
That's what makes a generation a generation. Yeah. So, if you want to understand, well, okay, so then why in the world are, I don't know, we'll pick one, baby boomers. Why are baby boomers so different? Well, baby boomers grew up during civil rights, and there was a ton of assassinations. Think about it. Martin King, Malcolm X, JFK, RFK, just like kind of go through it. Yeah, the Vietnam War, Cold War, space travel. That is very different than even the very next generation of Generation X, who, then that's me, by the way, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Challenger disaster, MTV. It's like we're growing up in a different world.
Right.
And the problem is that instead of accepting the fact that, okay, you grew up in a different world and we're all trying to kind of adjust based on the world you grew up in, we're saying, well, why aren't, okay, I'll give you one that bugs me. Millennials and the younger generation, they just have no communication skills. That is ridiculous. Number one, they have great communication skills. But number two, they're on their device all the time. Guess what? We're in a world where having digital communication is really important. So to look down on them for being on their devices and communicating that way and not understanding that's the world, that's like someone coming up to me and saying, you know what, you're smart, but this generation, they're so good at driving horses and buggies. Well, I'm good with that. I've got a car. I don't really need that skill. So I think that's really where we miss it. And, one little caveat to it is often the cultures of our companies, especially if they're very established, they're a culture that's an older generation. Mm-hmm. So often, like I work a lot with the federal government. A lot of my government clients, their culture is really of either the traditionalist, kind of that pre-baby boomer generation, or baby boomers. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get younger people, millennials and globals, to assimilate and conform to a culture that's outdated. And that's why organizations have this problem, because they're like, well, we're doing it this way. This is our culture. Your culture's not good. Your culture's old. You need to change your culture. You need to understand the world is changing and you got to change with, or things are not going to go well. So that's my, soapbox 3-minute free speech on generational diversity.
No, thank you. I love that. And I love the little snapshots where people grow up in certain times. And so their habits and thought patterns and everything else are formed by that. It's the same with money. When we look back at our parents who grew up in the Depression, I mean, their money thinking may not necessarily, it was good, at the time and for a while after, but, does it apply now? I don't know. But people are still kind of touting a lot of the same thinking and the same rules. So, it's really great. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, my gosh, instead of saying, do it our way, it's been working forever, and we still want it to run this old way, to not listen to the new people coming in and learn from them and really kind of infiltrate the place with new ideas is just such a loss, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even fathom it. So personally, my wife and I are having this conversation. I'm Gen X, but I'm pretty sure the majority of my friends are millennial or Gen Z, like the majority. It's just their energy and their thoughts. And now I also do have friends who are baby boomers and Generation X, especially because I do a lot with admirals and generals and CEOs, and so I'm in that space as well. But I just think that I learned, right? So I'm fairly tech savvy. I think I'd be that way anyway. But who you're around helps to dictate who you are.
Right.
And so just like you said, not listening to those who are of a different generation. This goes younger or older.
Yeah.
So just a different listening to them because you don't value them is like having an 8-cylinder car that runs on 5 cylinders. You're just not getting everything you should get. What do is listen. Even if we go, I don't agree with that, but then later we go, but I do understand it. See, I don't have to agree with Michelle. I don't have to agree with everything that you said. We can have totally different worldviews,
right?
But if I at least understand it and respect it, that means the world. And then it allows me to connect and work with other people who I don't share their worldview or their thoughts, but I can respect and understand it and see where they're coming from. And that allows us to still treat everyone as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Gosh, this is going fast, Tony. I want to just do a couple minutes on two different topics, but navigating disruption was one thing. I just wanted to get a quick comment from you on that. Doesn't have to be too quick, but
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm telling a lot of stories, so I know I'm
I love
probably
it.
like
It's
killing your
great.
time here. And if I don't know what your time frame on, we can go a little long on my end if we need to.
Okay,
But
all right, we'll go. Well, let's hit navigating disruption, and then I want to talk about money for just a minute with you.
yeah. So disruption. So all disruption is unexpected change. That's all it is. It's just normally more severe. People like, oh my gosh, especially in the speaking industry, there's never been anything like COVID. I'm like, yeah, you're right. COVID is very unique. Unless you're around in 2008 for the recession, that was really strange and strong. But that's unique. Well, unless you remember 9/11, right? You can keep going back every 8 to 10 years. Something major happened. So disruption is one of those things where you need a moment to go back, because what's happening is you basically lost your comfort zone. And I know it sounds trite and it sounds motivational, but really that's what happens. We get thrown into a space that we're unfamiliar with, and it's so unknown. And it's like one time I did one of those climbing walls, and I got to the top, and I realized at the end that for me to get this climb back down, I had to let go and just trust. That's how it feels. You've got nothing to hold on to. And so the thing about navigating disruption is there are some things we should be thinking. Number one, we should be aware of. For example, we have all gone through an extraordinary amount of stress. Like most actuaries will tell you that we're working at an elevated risk level right now. Like the average person, just from all we've gone through in the last couple of years. So if you're aware of that, then you don't beat yourself up for some of the mistakes that you make, right? You go, okay, I'm good. Okay, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to apologize for it. But I also understand there's nothing about right now that's normal. So I started to understand that. I started to understand that I go through some very strong emotions. My friend group, my community group, I think many of us have become far more appreciative of our community group, right? All these things are there. But the thing I've been thinking about recently, and I actually filled the night 2 nights ago, is, the way I went from being an engineer to working in faith-based nonprofit was this incredible story. But for me to take the leap, I took a 70% cut in pay. So I want to say that on a show that talks about money, we took a 70% cut in pay 3 weeks after getting married, right?
Wow. That's impressive.
And most people say, oh, gosh, the number one cause of divorce is money. Well, we're 27 years in. We did well, I would say. But I'll tell you what it did. What it made me realize is quite often we don't make decisions, or we don't take chances, or during disruption, we get stuck. And I think a lot of people have felt that. They felt that deer in the headlights thing. Some people may still feel it. And there's some, things we could talk about in the future that help you through it. But when you start to realize this box that you're caught in right now isn't real.
Yeah.
It's imaginary. It's a function of things that you've been told from your parents, experiences that you had growing up that really don't apply right now, things you've heard in the media, from other friends, in school. When you realize that this box, the things that is changing how you make decisions, isn't real, that's the game changer. It's like in the Matrix where, Neil's talking to this kid who could be the one, and the kid bends a spoon with his head, with his, not his mind, not his head. He could fit with his head easily, but with his mind. And Neil goes, that's amazing. The kid goes, yeah, but the thing is, there's no spoon, right? When we realize there's no box, there's no reason we can't do things. It's okay to fail. Les Brown used to tell me, anything that you want to do well, I'm going to make sure I say this right. anything that's worth doing is worth doing poorly.
Hmm.
That's what he used to say.
Hmm.
Anything that's worth doing is worth doing poorly because you have to do it poorly before you do it well. And that quite often we think, but I don't want to do it poorly because I've been doing these other things well. So I'm going to go back and do the things that I do well. But they don't apply anymore. So if you realize in this world, it's okay to start over. It's okay to try something new. It's okay it's okay to leave the country for a month, which is exactly what I just did, right? I never would have done this before, but I'm like, there's no box. I have no one to prove anything to, no one to explain it to. I just have to do what's right for me. Once you start doing that,
Yeah.
a lot of the other things can fall into place.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love the there's no box. Yeah, that's really something important to think about. And
Yeah.
we do that. We do that to ourselves all the time. We create all kinds of boxes all over the place. So, yeah, that's fabulous. I I wanted to talk a minute. You brought up money and the pay cut that you took to do something that was frankly probably more fulfilling for you and felt like it was where you needed to be in that moment. Um, we talked about kind of redefining the idea of being rich, and I love what you said. You said something about, I'm probably not quoting it perfectly, but rich is being in a place where money doesn't really come into every decision. And I always say money is part of every decision, which makes it important to have a relationship. But you're absolutely right. When it's not a consideration with everything you do, that there's freedom in that. Would you like to elaborate a little on that?
Yeah. And first, I would like to clarify
Yeah. Okay.
when we took that 70% pay cut, it hurt. I
Okay.
want to make sure it hurt. We were living in downtown Chicago. It hurt. Okay. But we were trying to do something that was more fulfilling, more important. Um, yeah. So, I mean, we're both saying something similar. Money does enter into every decision because every decision we make has financial repercussions.
Yeah.
But to me, being rich is not about having the bigger house, the you know the nine Porsche 911. Although I'm going to get my Porsche 911, that's a different conversation. It's not about having the massive yacht. It's not about the huge vacations. I believe that we all need is to be able to not have money impact our everyday decisions. If you go to the grocery store and you want to buy that and you can just buy it and don't have to think about it or wonder yourself, okay, so what bill does that affect? Or all these other things. To me, that's the wealth that we need.
Mm.
Like, I'm starting to live by that because what that does for me is it gives me so much emotional freedom.
Yeah.
I'm not chasing Instagram influencers who are pretending to live a life they're not living. I'm not chasing people who are in my industry and appear to be making more money than I'm making. I'm not, I want to be able to, for me to be happy and have a reduced level of stress and to say, you know what? there's a lot of stuff I realize I don't need. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't. And I don't want. I mean, I there are things I want and I want to be able to, but if on a daily basis I can do the things that I want to do and I have the stress of debt and the stress of can I make this financial decision? Of course, I'm not talking about making big purchases, but on an everyday basis, if you don't have that burden of financial guilt and debt on you, the amount of freedom you experience is hard to explain. And we're in that space right now. So I'm saying it from a person who's not been there and is now in there. It's a huge difference. Like people say money can't buy happiness. I partially agree with that. You can do a lot of things with money, but here's what I will say. It's really hard to be happy when you have a lot of debt
Mm-hmm.
or when you don't know how you're going to get out of the situation. That burden is hard to be. Number one, it's hard for you to be happy in, but number two, we're not designed to carry that kind of stress. And so if we could be responsible enough and regardless of how much money we make, live in such a way that money does not continue to impact our everyday decisions, that's a game changer. And to me, that is rich more than buying a lot of stuff. Because what you're going to find out is there are a lot of people who financially should be rich. They think about money all the time. They don't get to experience wealth. I think that's the difference.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. That was really powerful, and yeah, I think really important for people to hear. That's a great way to look at money and your money goals and everything. So, well, I personally hate to wrap this up, but I'm afraid when I introduced you that I might have mixed up your books. Which one came first? Which one came second? Do you want to? Yeah.
So that was totally my mistake. I sent on copy. So here's what happened. The book was originally called Why I Hate My Job, understanding human dimension of leadership. And then I realized the people who need to read that would never buy a book called Why I Hate My Job. So we changed it to The Force Multiplier. So they're actually the same book. Okay, and so that was totally my mistake. I apologize. The minute you said, I'm like, oh, I got to go change that. So you didn't mess up anything. I messed that one.
Well, thank you. It looks like a great book. Anyway, that's really my point is people should be reading that book. And how else can people find you, listen to you? This was just a tiny bit of what you can share and the knowledge you have. I'd love for people to continue to follow you.
Sure. Well, I mean, in this digital age, you can do everything through just knowing my name, Tony Chatman, Chatman. TonyChatman.com is my website, as we have had on the banner below. The best places to follow me are on Instagram, Tony Chatman Speaks, LinkedIn, Tony Chatman. I'm starting to do TikTok probably next week, and that's going to be kind of TikTok and YouTube. I've not spent as much time on Twitter lately, I have to be honest. Twitter has kind of gotten to a place where I don't think it's emotionally healthy, but I also think that may be a reason that I'm going to do it, because part of what I'm really focusing everything on is I'm still doing conscious bias, talk about navigating disruption, but I just realized we need to be more whole as people and better as people. And so, and by better, it's not a criticism. It's, we have to have more positive things going our way, and not the light, fluffy, stop drinking soda and you'll lose 50 pounds type, lies, but really things that strengthen us, that empower us, that allow us to fully live the lives that we want to live. And so, those are the places. Again, Instagram, Tony Chatman Speaks, LinkedIn, Tony Chatman. I have Tony Chatman, I also have that on TikTok, and I'm starting TikTok, as well as Tony Chatman on YouTube. Those will be able to find me. And if you go to my website, there's links to everything. I even have my cell phone on my website, okay? That's how accessible I am. I mean, literally, the number on my website is my cell phone. So you can get a hold of me if you want to.
Okay. Well, Tony, thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you what a treat it was for me, and an honor. And yeah, there's a lot to learn from you. I hope our audience members will find you out there and learn from you. There's a tremendous amount to be gained by that. And audience, thank you for being here. And we are here streaming from ubngo.com every Monday night at 7. I'd love for you to leave a review and follow the show, because that's how we get wonderful guests like Tony to come on and chat with us. And this was such a pleasure, and I can't wait for you to listen to the show. So thank you. We'll see you next week.